Oftentimes I see that we overcomplicate the creative, and I think this stems from not having a clear direction on what the creative is supposed to be doing. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Tetrimuse podcast. My name is James King, and I'm so glad to have you here. About 20 years ago, I worked for a company that specialized in manufacturing high-end audio cables. And within that company, they had a division of it that built high-end speakers and monitors, so for studio use. I remember one time in particular, I went in, I think it was a Saturday because it was pretty quiet there, and I just cranked out building what is called crossovers. And what I had to do is I had to take this spool of cable and unwind that cable and clip it and then scratch off the coating on it so that the cable became bare. And then I had to test it to make sure that it was hitting within the certain measurement electronically that it needed to hit. I spent hours and hours just scraping off these things, and I can still remember the way my fingers felt as I finished doing that, and they were raw and hurting. But they would use these crossovers to put inside the speakers. And for anybody who doesn't know how a speaker works, typically when you have more than two drivers, which are what a lot of people call the speaker or the speaker cone, they're what output the sound. Most of the time you'll see speakers that have two drivers in them. One that's more of a woofer, it's usually pretty big, and then one that's a tweeter that is a little bit smaller. The subwoofer focused on the lower end frequencies, whereas the tweeter focused on the high end frequencies. And what a crossover does is it tries to find the optimal point where the frequencies cross. So think of it like this. If you have a tweeter that's trying to output all the frequencies, it can't handle the low end very good. And on the other side of that, you have the subwoofer that can't really handle the high end frequencies very good. And when you have those drivers trying to fire all frequencies all the time, it's not very efficient and it won't sound that great. I think this is a really interesting analogy when we start talking more about creativity. Now, I think creativity is the crossover between brand to market. You need creativity as a vehicle to communicate to your audience. So this is kind of a fun analogy when we start thinking about the low frequencies to the high frequencies or brand to market. You need something in between there to communicate. And to me, that's the creative that you build as an artist. I like to tell people that creativity is putting form to ambiguity. And when I worked as a designer, this was something that I had to do often because people will have these ideas or they have these communications that they want to put out, but they don't know how to make the vehicle to get there. Creativity is a vehicle to do that, but you need to put form to it in order for it to have some sort of communication to it. So whether that's using design or whether you do photography or whether you're even doing copy, meaning like your written word, that's all creative. So what we want to do is we want to use creative as a vehicle to create form for ambiguous ideas that we can create communication out of. So there's three components we're going to talk about: brand, creative, and marketing. Now this is similar to what I talked about in the last podcast, but the focus is going to be mostly on creative. So brand is who you are, creative, the visual manifestation of who you are, and then marketing, which is the distribution of who you are. So one of the things I've seen is that we tend to overcomplicate the creative, and I think this stems from not having a clear direction on what the creative is supposed to be doing. And the reason why I say that is because in my experience, what I've found is if you don't have a clear direction, then you're just essentially throwing darts in the dark. You need to understand what the end goal of the communication piece is, and you also need to have some idea of what you want that to look like. If you can do that, then it gives you a direction to point towards, and it helps you get closer to communicating the thing you want to the people you want it to communicate to. Understand yourself, understand your target demographic, and understand what you want that communication piece to do. And when you have cultural significance in play, then you can start understanding how the little elements that make up those target demographics or that community are going to help steer what that creative should look like. One really good way to do that, and I said this before, is adjectives. If you can put together some adjectives that describe the personality of the creative, that'll give you a direction to point towards. Now, this is the main point that I want to get across to everyone today. A lot of you out there aren't graphic designers. You may not be photographers. You may not be videographers. But you might need to hire people to do that content. Now, what happens is if you're going to hire somebody to create the creative for you, then you're going to need to understand how to tell them what you want. Essentially, you are becoming the creative director of your brand. Now, I see a lot of musicians out there who are at the mercy of whatever person's creating it for them. Now, if you find a photographer, you find a designer, and you love their style and you feel like it resonates with what your brand is trying to do, then by all means hire them and let them run free. But coming from somebody who does graphic design and photography, I know how helpful it is when somebody can say, hey, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Here is a mood board that I put together to try and help you implement what I'm trying to get in the long run. You want to create some type of vision for the creative so that way when they come and they make the content, it's on point with what you're doing. Otherwise, you might have a graphic designer who's creating content that looks good. You might have a photographer who's creating content that looks good, but they may not be symbiotic in the way they look, or they may not align from a brand perspective. So something to keep in mind when you're creating the content and you have to hire it out, make sure that you have a vision of where you want it to go. You are the captain of this ship and you need to direct it on where you want it to go. The last thing I want to talk about are consumer touch points. And in the corporate side, they have a term called the consumer journey. And what that is it's all the touch points that a consumer has as they interact with your brand. Now, I want you guys to start becoming mindful when you're creating this content, how it's going to be applied throughout all the touch points for those who are viewing your content. So that includes your Spotify, that includes your SoundCloud, that includes your distribution and your album art, it includes the photography that you're using, it includes your website. All of those are consumer touch points. And you want to make sure that they're aligned with each other and that there is a cohesive whole to all of them and that there is a clear understanding of what you're portraying from an artistic perspective for your brand and for your community. I hope this helps today, you guys. Creativity is such an ambiguous thing sometimes, and I know it's hard. And that's really what we're trying to uncover with this platform. We're trying to help people understand how to communicate with their audience, how to use creativity, how to use brand strategies in order to connect with a target demographic. And it's something that I just genuinely love. I just love how this stuff works because I love people and I love how communication can bring us closer together as individuals. So if you'd love to follow along with me on this journey as I build out this platform, I'd love to have you. Just hit the like, hit the subscribe button, send me a comment, send me a question, and please just keep in mind, we're trying to keep this a positive place to help people go out there and fulfill the life that they want to creatively. So thank you so much. We will catch you guys on the next one.